You know, when Walter Cronkite left the CBS anchor desk in 1981, he said, quote, "Old anchormen don't fade away. They just keep coming back for more." And you know what he did in recent years, appearing in documentaries on the Discovery Channel and providing weekly commentaries for Retirement Living TV. So with that, we look back at his final broadcasts.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
When Katie Couric took over as anchor of the CBS Evening News nearly 3 years ago, Walter Cronkite recorded the introduction to her at the top of the broadcast.
You're watching the Cronkite commentaries.
Couric returned the favor when Cronkite, at the age of 91, came out of retirement and signed on to give weekly commentaries on Retirement Living TV.
If I could tell you one thing about retirement, of course, one thing would be don't.
The Cronkite commentaries gave the veteran newsman a platform to offer his take on a host of issues, from climate change.
If ever there was a problem that the world had reason to discuss, it would be the matter of global warming and water.
To illegal immigration.
We brag about being a nation of immigrants, yet time after time, newcomers to our shores have met prejudice and sometimes violent opposition from those already here.
Cronkite's time at CBS News was dominated by the Cold War. Here, he comments on U.S.-China relations today.
Maybe these two giants could learn to cooperate for their own sakes and the good of the world.
It is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
Just like he stated his opinion about the Vietnam War, Cronkite shared his perspective on the war in Iraq.
I guess the ultimate lesson is that being a democracy, we, the people, are responsible for the actions of our leaders.
That was Cronkite's last commentary that he taped for Retirement Living TV.
Life has been very good to me, and I intend to be good to it, right on down through to the end, whatever that may be.
CBS News Chief Washington correspondent and host of Face the Nation, Bob Schieffer, joins us now with some memories of his longtime boss, Walter Cronkite. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Julie.
What was he like as a boss? What was he like to work for?
Well, it was great. I mean, he was a very good editor. Walter could always think of the question to ask you that you had forgotten to ask. And on those rare occasions when you had the answer to that question, you just felt so good about it. I was just in awe of Walter. He was what I wanted to be when I was a little boy growing up as a young reporter, and then to come to work for him, it was a great honor just to be a part of his team. I mean, I go back and look at some of the tapes of myself in those early days, and it was clear I was trying to sound like Walter Cronkite. I finally got over that, of course, but it's indescribable how it was to walk into this newsroom at CBS and discover you were on the team that had this great leader, which was something, I'd wanted to do it all my life. When I got here, it just didn't get any better than that.
Cronkite has had so many memorable moments on television for us as viewers, but what was your fondest memory of Walter Cronkite? Something from behind the scenes, perhaps?
The things I remember are what we all remember, because Walter reflected the mood and the feelings of the nation. The Kennedy assassination, that memorable broadcast when our hearts were broken by what had just happened, and we all knew that Walter Cronkite felt exactly the same way as we did. And then, of course, that moment 40 years ago today, when man first set foot on the moon, which was the great time for all of us, that too was one of the things that I will always remember. Going back to the assassination, Julie, up until that weekend when President Kennedy was shot, most Americans got their news from print, from newspapers. But from that weekend on, surveys would show that people would come to depend on television for their news, the majority of Americans. And Walter Cronkite and the way he handled that awful story that weekend it changed our habits of how we got news.
What do you think it was about him that made him so trusted by everyone? Because he didn't, he never wanted to really show his opinion on everything, and he gave it to us straight, but we've all felt like we really knew him.
Well, it was his authenticity. That's what came through to people. People understood that Walter Cronkite was a real reporter. He wasn't somebody who played one on television. He'd been out there. And when he took those positions, those rare times when he took a position on things like Vietnam, he didn't do it until after he had gone to Vietnam and had seen what was happening there. You understood that Walter had thought long and hard about this before he decided to give his opinion, and that's what made it so valuable and why people took it to heart.
Bob, can you just briefly tell me the story behind? I'm told that there was one time you and Walter Cronkite outsmarted Barbara Walters for an exclusive interview with then President Gerald Ford. What happened?
I'll tell you what happened. Barbara Walters had recorded an interview with Gerald Ford, then President Ford, that was to be broadcast the next day on the Today Show. And we set about, after we found out about that, trying to figure out some way to bust Barbara's scoop. And so Gerald Ford was appearing at a rally in Yonkers, New York, and I went to the then White House Chief of Staff, who, by the way, was 31-year-old Dick Cheney, and convinced him to let Walter come backstage just to say hello and greet the president. And so he did. We did it with a television crew. Walter walked in, microphone in one hand, shook hands with the president and said, "Hello, Mr. President, are you going to take your flu shot?" Because that was a big question going around. We had just started flu shots in this country, and people wondered if the president would. Gerald Ford just broke into this loud laugh and said, "Well, yes, Walter, I am." He said, I think I need to set an example for the nation. That night on the CBS Evening News, we started out with Walter Cronkite saying, "Good evening, President Ford told me in an exclusive interview that he will take his flu shot." And then we ran all 9 seconds of that interview. I'll tell you, it was my proudest moment, and from that moment on, Walter looked out for me and took care of old Bob. So I always look on it as the best scoop I ever got, and it didn't have my fingerprints on it at all. But Walter knew how it had come about. He loved it. Nobody loved a scoop more than Walter Cronkite.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks for sharing your Walter Cronkite stories with us.
You bet.